Keep Our Republic is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. Since the spring of 2020, we've been doing our part to help keep our republic. We do it through hyper-localized civic education. We talk with Americans through town halls, legal seminars, media briefings, and other events. We know a lot of Americans have a lot of questions right now about how our democracy really works. Questions like, what actually happens behind the scenes on election night, and just what is the power of the federal courts? That's why we're talking directly to election officials and judges from across the country. Together, we can help answer some of those questions. Welcome back to Keepers of Our Republic. My name is Brooke. I'm the Special Projects Manager here at Keep Our Republic. If you're new here, Keep Our Republic is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We are dedicated to strengthening trust in our elections and democratic institutions. Today, I get to sit down with Judge Paul Michel, who served on the U.S. Federal Court of Appeals from 1988 until his retirement in 2010. He was Chief Judge of that court for 6 years. Before that, he had a very distinguished career in public service and has been considered an expert in IP and patent law. Recently, Judge Michel joined Keep Our Republic's Article 3 Coalition, which is a working group of former federal judges who are advocating for the American judiciary, for its independence, and we are so grateful to have him here today to talk about some of those issues with us. Thank you, Judge Michel, and welcome to the podcast.
My pleasure.
So, as I mentioned in your sort of intro bio here, you recently joined Keep Our Republic's Article 3 Coalition. For those of you who aren't familiar, we've assembled an incredible group of former federal judges who are advocating for the American judiciary, for its independence, for the value of the rule of law in these sort of interesting times. Why did that appeal to you? Like what motivated you to continue working for free when you could be enjoying a nice retirement somewhere?
I was very busy doing consulting and pending litigations
Mhm.
over the last 15 years since retiring in 2010. I was finding that very engaging and enlivening, interesting work. They were almost all very big cases, mostly involving patent law. Um, and then I got a little bit more focused on trying to reform uh, intellectual property law to make it work better for the economy and for innovative and creative people. And then along came the present threat to the independence of the judiciary and the rule of law. So in the middle of the spring, I was asked by two judges who were part of Keep Our Republic's work over the last 5 years, if I would be interested in joining a new affiliate of Keep Our Republic that was going to be called the Article 3 Coalition. And of course, I immediately said yes, because it was clear to me that it was the most useful way I could spend my remaining time and energy. So it took no consideration at all. It was an automatic yes, and I've been working on it quite actively ever since. I'm hugely enthused about the potential of the coalition to do a lot of good because the public discourse has degenerated to the point where it's just shouts and smears in all directions and no dependable, factual, down-to-earth, commonsensical discussion. So everything has gotten blurred and distorted. And I think the Keep Our Republic Article 3 Coalition has very good potential to change that. Why? Well, because federal judges, judges in general, but particularly federal judges, have a high level of trust across just about every sector of our public, and therefore can be a credible voice. And of course, we can speak on behalf of the current federal trial and appellate judges, sitting judges, as we sometimes call them, because they're highly constrained in what they're permitted to say on issues of controversy or politics. So they're somewhat muzzled. By retiring in 2010, I sometimes say, only half jokingly, I regained my constitutional rights, particularly under the First Amendment. I think it's entirely proper that sitting judges are constrained. But given the challenges to the rule of law today, it's important for some people to be unconstrained, and that's all of us who've joined this coalition. I was the fourth judge to join. There were only three who started this, I think, in late March or perhaps early April. So I was the fourth. And since then, we've added 43 more judges. And as you noted in our discussion, they come from all around the country. The coalition is non-political, nonpartisan, or I might even say bipartisan. About half the judges were appointed by Republican presidents and about half by Democratic presidents. And individually, we're as diverse as you can imagine in every demographic, racial, age, geography, you name it, as diverse as could be. But we're totally unified in a commitment to trying to strengthen the rule of law, protect the Constitution, assure democratic governance, and it all turns on keeping um, the judiciary, particularly the federal judiciary, where most of the suits are pending that are challenging administration initiatives, keeping those judges insulated and protected from political interference so that they can apply the law and not apply the wishes of the president or any other elected politician. So I've done some very interesting things in a very lucky long career. I've been a lawyer for almost 65 years. I'm now 84. As I said, I'm fully retired, but I'm working pretty much every day on the coalition's mission. And despite having been a Watergate prosecutor, a Koreagate prosecutor, a relatively high Justice Department official, and other seemingly important jobs, and they were important, but I've never done anything nearly as important as this. So this is a great opportunity to try to serve the country in an area where I have some background. You know, I've served in all three branches of the government at length, the
Yeah.
legislative, executive, and judicial. And so I have some perspectives that are perhaps not shared by everybody, although the other members of the coalition also have fabulous backgrounds, very strong intellects, and lots of perspectives that are very useful. So I think together we can help uh, constrain some of the lies and unmask some of the distortions that are going on, and above all, inform the interested citizenry and media of what's at stake, what's happening, and why it's so important, not to lawyers, not to courts, but to every single American. So I'm
Mhm.
thrilled to be part of it.
Gosh, so much there to unpack. So you mentioned just very briefly, I guess I'll start sort of at the beginning of your career. You mentioned that you were an assistant Watergate prosecutor, and you also worked on the Koreagate prosecutions for the DOJ. And then before that, you were an assistant district attorney in the Philadelphia DA's office. Obviously, public service is a huge theme of your career. Why do you think, in a profession where there's an opportunity to make a lot of money right off the bat, what do you think drew you to public service for so long?
Well, it was my goal all along to
Hmm.
be a lawyer serving the public as opposed to individual private clients, companies, or persons. And actually, it goes way back when I was in fourth or fifth grade. I read a biography of Thomas Jefferson. What struck me most about his life history was that most of his career, although he was well trained in law by the famous George Wythe and was a very great intellectual and learned man himself, he didn't spend much of his life representing private clients. He spent most of it being a public leader, a political theorist, and of course the drafter of the Declaration of Independence, and later governor of Virginia, and a very important president. Um, So it appealed to me the idea that law could be used to help everybody, to
Mm.
help the whole society, as well. Of course, it's very important for individuals and companies to also be well represented by lawyers. But I was very drawn at an early age to this idea that you could be a lawyer on behalf of all the people. In 65 years of being a lawyer, I've never for one day worked for a private company or a private law firm. It's very unusual. I'm not recommending it to everybody else. I'm not bragging. It's just that this was what I had in deeply drilled into my consciousness all the way back to the fourth or fifth grade.
Yeah. I think for anyone that's gone into public service, that's really relatable. I still think, I've had a lot of hats and jobs in my life, and I still think getting to say, Brooke Bergen for the people in court was just the most powerful thing I'll get to do in my career. And I never took that for granted, and I know you didn't. It's interesting. So you've worked in all three branches, and obviously in your various executive roles, DOJ, at the DA's office, at Watergate, with Koreagate, you have this habit of taking on cases or investigations, of holding these people in power accountable. And historically, that's something we did get to see from the DOJ, from our executive branch, even when it was against themselves with the special prosecutor and stuff. Um, with that, with the possibility that that may not be how our judicial or our prosecutorial system works, at least for the next couple of years, like what do you think the role of the other branches is to continue to act as that check if DOJ isn't going to be a check on itself or on the executive? Like what role do you think the courts are going to have to try to step in to be that check on those other branches of power?
Well, that's a very rich, good question. I think fundamentally the job of courts is to apply the law and do justice as best fallible humans can. And that often means checking abuses of power by government itself, but it's of course not limited to that. All kind of abuses of power or law breaking are the business of courts to try to correct. Um, I don't think the current challenges change the basic function of judging. The only difference is that it used to be that judges could assume that what the government's lawyer was saying was absolutely correct, and nothing was distorted, fabricated, uh, omitted, or twisted in any way. And now, according to what I understand from reading the daily press, many judges in the federal courts no longer feel that they can have that level of trust in statements made in court by Justice Department lawyers. So, of course, the job of the court is to ferret out the truth, to look behind assertions made by lawyers. Of course, as you know so well yourself, arguments made by lawyers are not evidence, and cases are
As much
supposed
as
to
we would
turn
like them
on
to be sometimes, but
the facts, and the facts are identified by evidence and contrary evidence and the fact-finding process. So judges will have to continue to do that. It's now more burdensome because they have to look behind statements of the uh, Justice Department lawyers in many cases with a skepticism much greater than ever in the past. But it was always the function of the judges in the federal courts to um, look past arguments made by lawyers on any side of a controversy, public or private. So the job hasn't changed, the function hasn't changed. It might be more burdensome now, which is unfortunate. You know, the government used to get great benefit out of the high level of trust, long earned, um, and the reputation government lawyers had for candor. But that's falling off now, which is unfortunate. It means it's harder for the government to make its case effectively. It means it's harder for the opposition to function and harder for judges to function. And really, in the end, it doesn't serve the Justice Department when it loses that extra credibility. So
Right.
everybody suffers from lawyers acting like political puppets instead of uh, law enforcers. That's the role of judges. It continues, but it's even harder now. And there's also a grave question about compliance. When judges do ferret out the facts, do find the facts, do apply the law, and issue injunctions, for example, to halt a government initiative that's unlawful, the question arises, will the injunction be honored? Will the
Right.
government follow the order of the court or not? I don't think we've seen what I would call open defiance, but from what I read, it looks like there's been a lot of resistance, a lot of stalling, a lot of befogging, and other such tactics. And if we get to more open defiance of court orders, we are going to have what many call a constitutional crisis. We certainly seem to be headed in that direction. Compliance is a big issue even after the courts have done their job of finding the facts and applying the law. And of course, the Congress has enormous responsibilities in on these issues as well as the judges because uh, they enact the laws.
Yeah.
They pass the budgets and appropriate money. So, for example, the Marshals Service protects federal judges. The Marshal Service, of course, has a budget, a taxpayer-funded budget. And if their budget's inadequate, their protective function can be compromised. And beyond budgets, the specific powers of the Marshal Service to adequately afford those protections, particularly when some of the threats come from anonymous sources who have
Mhm.
apparently been motivated by social media uh, statements of an outrageous sort to think they're doing some kind of patriotic duty by intimidating a judge or threatening a judge or even harming a judge. And of course, some judges have been actually murdered and some family members too. Um, so the legislature has to make sure the marshals have the means, the money, and the specific authorities to carry out their protective duties successfully. And there's a complication because the Marshal Service is part of the Justice Department. In fact, when I was Associate Deputy Attorney General way back in the 70s, one of my assignments was to help supervise the FBI, the Marshal
Mhm.
Service, the Prison Service, and the U.S. attorneys. And at that point, the Marshal Service dedication to executing court orders and uh, protecting the judiciary as well was unquestioned. I think it's still unquestioned, but the specter arises whether that will continue because technically the Marshal Service is under the ultimate control of the Attorney General,
Mhm.
who of course takes orders from the President, and that's correct under our system. But if the Marshal Service is ordered by the Attorney General to not protect judges or not execute certain orders or not execute any orders, for example, by arresting people found in contempt of court, um, then again, we're going to have a constitutional crisis. I don't think it's going to happen. It's never happened before in 250 years of our government, but it could happen, and it's a very worrisome prospect. All the more reason why the Article 3 coalition has such an important voice here. And the duties of the Congress, of course, go beyond simply the Marshal Service. So, for example, the question of what are the options of a judge who's found a government action to be unlawful, an ongoing action to be unlawful, um, and orders it to stop. can it be ordered to stop on a nationwide basis if it's a nationwide initiative? In a recent Supreme Court case cast a lot of doubt about the geographic reach of injunctions or its reach to people other than the plaintiffs in the case in front of a district judge. Another duty of Congress would be to clarify and, if necessary, which I think it might be, to expand the injunctive powers of courts, at least clarify them and maybe expand them. So there's a lot on the agenda for the Congress, as well as a lot of challenge before the courts. And in our three branch government, all three have to function effectively, cooperatively, but independently in order for the whole thing to work the way it's worked rather well over 2.5 centuries.
Right.
But maybe now there's a growing question about whether it can continue to work well because of encroachment by one branch against the other or non-performance of
Right.
duties by one branch or another. So we're in a fraught time. And I think most people have no understanding of how grave the dangers are, how severe the threats are. And I think they seem to actually be growing. I think we're sort of uh, drifting toward increased crises, all the more important for the Article 3 coalition to speak loudly and boldly and hopefully persuasively.
So you mentioned the sort of effect on injunctive relief kind of briefly there. Of course, for those who aren't familiar, he's referencing Trump v. Casa, a Supreme Court ruling that came out earlier this year. For the non-lawyers in the audience, of which I think we have a few, can you give just a really brief sort of summary of what the effect of that what we think the effect of that ruling is going to be? I know that there are some thoughts on potentially loopholes that Justice Barrett may have left in terms of how nationwide injunctive relief can continue, but in general, what's going to be the effect of that ruling?
Well, the decision is understood to limit injunctive relief to the parties in front of the particular judge who issues an injunction or is considering doing so. And that would seem to mean it cannot be a so-called nationwide injunction. Um, and so what was thought to be one option available to judges seems to be off the table. Fortunately, there are other options. For example, what lawyers call class actions involving large numbers and groups of plaintiffs are an available avenue. And in that case, the CASA decision would not block the relief because it would be the rights of all the members of the class that were adjudicated, and therefore the injunctive relief doesn't go beyond the plaintiffs before the court. Um, and there are other avenues as well, including the Administrative Procedures Act, which doesn't uh, have the same limits that ordinary civil injunctions do. So there are other options, but the CASA decision, as it's currently understood, is problematic from the standpoint of courts being effective. And my guess is that's not the last word from the Supreme Court, and there'll be some further litigation and exposition and clarification by the court of the reach of injunctive powers and also their limits.
Right. And you kind of hinted earlier, if you had a magic wand, I guess, or a magic gavel, maybe that's a better analogy. You think it should be perhaps the role of Congress to step in and deal with this injunctive relief issue and clarify or codify us back to a better place.
Yes, that's a proper role for Congress. I think it's a necessary role for Congress. And as I said, the Supreme Court also has the opportunity and
Right.
the obligation to try to clarify and rationalize the law on its own. Um, and one thing that Congress could do harkens back to the civil rights era of the 50s and 60s and 70s. At that point, there was a statutory scheme whereby when injunctive relief of a broad sort was before the court, instead of a single district judge sitting, there would be three district judges randomly drawn to hear the matter. And then the matter would become, if injunctive relief was ordered, would become immediately appealable to the Supreme Court, skipping by the normal Court of Appeals, the intermediate step. And I think that scheme served a lot of purposes. It meant it wasn't just one judge's judgment,
Right.
it was three. And it accelerated the process of review greatly by skipping the appellate courts. There's value in appellate courts supervising and reviewing the rulings of the district courts that they oversee, um, but it does slow things down if cases are going to end up in the Supreme Court anyway. So
Right.
there's historical practices that could be modified and adopted, and there are other things that Congress could do as well. Of course, getting the attention of the Congress when they're besieged by 1,000 other issues and demands um, and distractions, I might add, is very difficult. And once again, I think the singular voice of former federal trial and appeals court judges could be very helpful to Congress in seeing what's feasible, what's desirable, and getting their attention,
Yeah.
which is going to be hard to do, but not impossible. And if anybody can do it, I think the Article 3 coalition can.
I completely agree. And it's interesting you mentioned the civil rights era. It's not hard to it wasn't that long ago, obviously, and it's not hard to imagine a world where we're now facing um, a world where you may have different rights in Maryland than you do in Alabama, than you do in California. If you have this patchwork of injunctions that only apply to the plaintiff, or if you aren't a part of the class for whatever reason, you have a real patchwork system of inconsistently applied laws and rights under this new proposed scheme from CASA. What do you think that will do if there is this inconsistency or perceived inconsistency in how laws are being applied? Like, what effect do you think that may have on public trust, like in our judicial and legal systems?
Well, I mentioned earlier that compared to many other uh, public figures, particularly elected politicians, federal judges enjoy a very high level of respect, um, which has, of course, been very helpful and beneficial to the work of the coalition and in many other ways as well. Uh, I do think there is some erosion of that respect
Mhm.
because of extreme statements made in legacy media and social media by various political actors, going all the way to the top of the executive branch, even. Uh, so there is a threat, not just to the safety of judges, not just to the rule of law, but to the ability of the interaction of the branches to function successfully. I think that the defenders of the Supreme Court ruling would argue with you and they would say, no, no, the rights aren't different in the 94 district courts. They're exactly the same. It's just that the remedy might be different from one court to another.
Sure.
But you're certainly correct in pointing out that there's a potential to have an injunction issued in one district court and denied in a district court in the same state or a neighboring state, and therefore inconsistent results. Of course, people say, well, yes, but that can get straightened out on appeal, maybe, which is potentially true, but it's not a very happy arrangement to have inconsistent remedies. Uh, and to me, there's some lack of practicality and common sense
Yeah.
if what the Supreme Court means is that even if the program being challenged is a nationwide program that applies to every single American, there can't be a nationwide injunction. What? I mean, what's the common sense of that?
Right.
And if the district judge has made a mistake in our system, you assume that it will be corrected by the Court of Appeals or by the Supreme Court. And I think that assumption is well justified. So I don't quite understand the thinking that seems to be dominant in the Supreme Court. And I think it may even shift. My perception is that all judges, sitting judges, are struggling to keep up with new challenges, severe new challenges they've never seen before. Um, they're all learning. They're in a learning mode. It's like on-the-job training of the most extreme sort. And I think that even applies to the Supreme Court. So I'm not sure we've heard the last word on injunctive relief from the Supreme Court, uh, because they have to face the ongoing um, realities in our country just the way lower court judges do. I have great respect for the nine justices. Over the years, I've known some of them personally reasonably well. Um, I've actually sat with Justice Sotomayor when she was a Second Circuit judge because I sat often with that court when it was shorthanded. And she's an extremely bright, very dedicated, good person. The same thing is true of the others. But one of my favorite justices over recent history was Justice O'Connor because she had a wonderfully practical sense of what works in the real world, not in legal theory or in law review articles, but in actual economic or political circumstances. And that's a very important perspective. There are people on the court who have that perspective, but others maybe less so. But I think the Supreme Court is going to learn to cope with these new challenges just the way the lower court judges are having to learn. Everybody's going to have to do their job the best they can. And one of the things that's so unusual is not just the variety and severity of the challenges, but the pace. They're coming at the courts at an unbelievable pace,
It's
maybe
relentless.
100 times faster than ever before. So courts are going to have to learn to be much faster and more practical and clearer in their rulings so that they can't so easily be distorted by politicians for self-serving purposes and the comments made to the media. If court opinions were written for ordinary people and not for law professors or law review editors or something, it would be much better. And in my opinion, opinions could be much shorter and more to the point that would benefit everybody. And I've always had that view. I had the goal when I was a sitting judge on the federal circuit that if you can't do it in 12 pages, you just probably can't do it at all.
You're a law student's dream. No, I think, and you mentioned public trust in there as well, and it's true. The particularly the federal judiciary does enjoy quite high levels of public trust, but we've seen, and I think it's some recent polling by Pew and Gallup over the last couple of years that that trust is kind of, um, might say plummeting. It's certainly going down in the past few years. How do you think? As someone that's been watching that both inside and outside over the past couple of years, like how do you think we got here in terms of the public not maybe having that same level of trust in their judicial officers?
Well, the difference is in what the public is told
Yeah.
by famous political figures who have unlimited access to legacy media and social media, some of which have their own websites or media sites. Uh, I was appointed, for example, in the last year of the Reagan administration by President Reagan. And it would be unthinkable for President Reagan to say, and he never did say anything remotely like what's been said by some more recent presidents, particularly the current president, but not he alone. In fact, Reagan said in a well-known statement that the independence of the judiciary was critical, and that the American people would not stand for it being compromised by politics. Uh, and succeeding presidents, as well as prior presidents, had much the same view and said so. And now all of a sudden, we have political leaders calling for the impeachment of judges, not for any misconduct, but simply because the ruling in the case before them is disliked by the leaders of the current administration. So when judges are called leftist lunatics and things like that, a lot of people in the public don't know what to think. So it's not surprising to me that there's been some erosion of the trust in judges because they're being uh, demonized in most extreme terms by some of the most famous political leaders of our day. And that's created a whole new a dynamic. I feel sorry for the ordinary citizens because they're bombarded with lies and distortions and omissions and twists and turns and fabrications and all kind of other things by all sorts of people in 10 different directions. So how can they sort all this out?
Right.
It's not easy. So I feel sorry for the challenge to citizens, particularly when they have to vote to elect or re-elect political leaders, whether it's the president or members of Congress. And we never had that before. And we don't know. We can't be sure what the outcome is going to be. Could our whole democracy collapse? Sure. Other republics over the eons of history have frequently collapsed after some period of time and were replaced by dictators. So Americans can't safely assume that, oh, that could never happen here. It could happen anywhere. It has happened anywhere, including recently in countries like Turkey and Hungary and some others. Um, so we're in what uh, people sometimes say are uncharted waters, which is certainly correct, and very threatening waters
Yeah.
too, very dangerous waters. So everybody's got to kind of quiet down and get their act together and do their job in a honest, forthright way for the benefit of the country and the preservation of the rule of law and democratic governance.
The irony is that as you identified, I think so much of where we're at is coming from these very public, politicized statements about the judiciary by politicians, by anyone with a microphone. And in a lot of cases, these politicians in the other two branches, like they are getting elected, the more bombastic or the more politicized they are, the more likely it feels like they are to get elected. Whereas your colleagues who are still sitting on the bench are very much, comparatively, very much constrained in what they can say, except for in the cases where you do have political judicial elections on the state level. But you guys in the Article 3 coalition, men and women who have the opportunity to now act as a voice for those judges who do not have the same ability to speak out right now, is so powerful. And I think brings so much value add to the discourse that needs to happen right now to prevent us from continuing down that slippery slope. Is there anything you would like to say to your colleagues who are still sitting on the bench, who maybe can't get on a podcast and talk as freely right now, but who are themselves experiencing this crisis, potential crisis that we find ourselves in?
Brooke, frankly, I don't think the judges have any confusion about what they have to do,
Yeah.
despite pressures or demonization or any other things like that. And as much as I feel I would want to encourage them, I don't really think they need it. Uh, uh, they're committed to doing their job. As you pointed out earlier, lots of lawyers make big money. And judges do not make big money, and neither do Justice Department lawyers or other similarly situated members of the legal profession. So the judges are like Marines. They're all volunteers. They know the job is sometimes very unpopular, can be very dangerous, is almost always controversial. In every case, practically every case, at least one party is furious with the result. And sometimes both parties are furious with the result. And sometimes elements in the public are furious with the result. Civil case, criminal case, anything. But that's the nature of being a judge. I used to tell people, if you can't send people to jail, and jails are horrible places, you can't be a judge. It's part of the job. And there are other parts of the job, but I have great confidence in the current sitting judges, regardless of who appointed them, including the current president. Because when a judge takes the oath, they're committing themselves before the world to rule based on the law, not their own political or personal views, and not the views of anybody who may have appointed them or had a hand in their appointment. In a way, judges sort of become like clerics. They're part of a discipline that's way bigger than themselves. And they have to keep their own ego and their own personal opinions out of the picture and follow the discipline. And I think judges are quite good at doing that. I sat with many courts in addition to my own. I mentioned earlier the Second Circuit, but I also sat with the Fifth, the Ninth, and the DC circuits, and for 22 years on the Federal Circuit. And I was so impressed, regardless of the personal background or who appointed them or whether they were active in politics before. Once they became judges, they became a new person. They became dedicated to the discipline. They aren't perfect. Nobody's perfect. Of course, judges make mistakes like anybody else. But I think the country can reliably count on the judges to do their best to apply law and not politics.
Yeah. Well, I can't think of a possibly more hopeful note to end on than that in a world that seems like it's only doom and gloom. You gave us something positive and beautiful to think about at the end there. Judge, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for the work you did as a public servant and, of course, now with the Article 3 Coalition. Look forward to speaking with you again soon. And thanks so much for taking the time with us.
Thank you.
If you like this episode, please share it on social media and tell your friends. It's the best way for folks to find out about us. I hope you'll agree that our guest is indeed a keeper of the Republic. If you want to learn more about how you can help keep our Republic, stop on over to our website, keepourrepublic.org.